A young girl bursts into a packed courtroom, her face streaked with tears and her voice trembling as she cries out for help. The judge, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, freezes the moment she utters her name, a name that shatters his composure and leaves the entire room in stunned silence. Within seconds, he's dialing 911, unraveling a chain of events that will expose buried secrets, dangerous conspiracies, and a family torn apart by betrayal. But as the truth comes to light, one question remains: can justice and redemption heal wounds this deep? The courtroom was bustling with the usual rhythm of legal proceedings. Lawyers shuffled papers, plaintiffs whispered anxiously to their attorneys, and the gallery murmured quietly as Judge Malcolm Everhart presided over a custody case. The judge was known for his sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach, his gray eyes cutting through the pretense of legal arguments to get to the heart of the matter. It was another routine day in his packed schedule. But that sense of normalcy shattered in an instant. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom flew open, slamming against the walls with a loud thud. Gasps rippled through the room as all heads turned toward the commotion. A young black girl, no older than 12, stumbled into the courtroom. Her small frame was trembling, her hair disheveled, and her tear-streaked face was a mask of desperation. Her clothes, though once brightly colored, were tattered and stained, as though she had been running for miles. "Please," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. "Help me." The bailiff started toward her, his hand resting on the baton at his side, but Judge Everhart raised a commanding hand. "Stop," he ordered. "Let her speak." The courtroom fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The girl's wide, tear-filled eyes scanned the room until they landed on the judge. She took a hesitant step forward, her chest heaving with labored breaths. The way she looked at him was both pleading and trusting, as though she knew he was her only hope. Judge Everhart leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the polished wooden bench. His voice softened. "Young lady, what's your name?" "Sapphire," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sapphire Jameson." The name seemed to hang in the air, heavy and electric. Judge Everhart froze, the color draining from his face. His grip tightened on the edge of the bench as if steadying himself against an invisible force. Sapphire Jameson. The name struck a chord deep within him, stirring memories he had buried long ago. "What's wrong?" one of the lawyers asked, breaking the silence. Judge Everhart ignored the question, his gaze fixed on the girl. "Sapphire," he said carefully, his voice tinged with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Who sent you here?" Sapphire wiped at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. "My mom," she said, her voice trembling. "She told me. She said if anything bad happened, I should find you. She said you'd help." The judge's heart seemed to stop for a moment, then thundered back to life in his chest. "Your mother," he said slowly. "Her name. Was it Vanessa Jameson?" Sapphire nodded, her lips quivering. "Yes. She told me to find you." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, the audience sensing the weight of the moment. Judge Everhart's mind raced, trying to piece together what this could mean. He had known Vanessa Jameson once, years ago. She had been the love of his life, but circumstances had pulled them apart. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, and now her child, possibly his child, was standing before him, begging for help. He swallowed hard, focusing on Sapphire. "Why are you here, Sapphire? What happened?" Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They took my little brother, Tobias. They locked him in a basement. I got away, but he's still there. Please, you have to help him. You're the only one who can." Judge Everhart's chest tightened. He leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. This wasn't just a plea for help, it was a life-or-death situation. The fear in Sapphire's eyes was palpable, and her words carried the weight of truth. He turned to the bailiff. "Clear the courtroom. Now." The bailiff nodded, his voice booming as he ordered everyone to leave. Lawyers, plaintiffs, and onlookers filed out quickly, casting curious glances over their shoulders. Within minutes, only Judge Everhart, Sapphire, and a few trusted court staff remained. The judge picked up the phone on his desk, his hand trembling slightly as he dialed. "This is Judge Malcolm Everhart," he said when the line connected. "I need an officer on site immediately. Send Detective Harrington if she's available. And notify 911, this is an emergency." Hanging up, he turned back to Sapphire. "You're safe now," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to help you." Sapphire nodded, but her small body continued to tremble. "You have to hurry," she whispered. "They'll hurt him. They'll hurt Tobias." Judge Everhart leaned closer, his voice steady and reassuring. "No one is going to hurt him. Not while I have anything to say about it." He stood, motioning for the bailiff to bring her a blanket and some water. "Stay here, Sapphire. I need you to tell me everything you can. Every detail matters." As the bailiff returned with a blanket and draped it over Sapphire's shoulders, the judge felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. He had spent decades keeping his emotions in check, but something about this girl, her bravery, her desperation, pierced through his defenses. He clenched his fists, his mind racing with questions. If Vanessa Jameson's child had come to him for help, it meant there was more to the story than he had ever imagined. And if there was even a chance that Sapphire and Tobias were his children, he owed it to them, and to Vanessa, to uncover the truth. But for now, he had only one goal: saving Tobias. Everything else could wait. Sapphire sat curled up in the large armchair in Judge Everhart's chambers, clutching the warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her small frame still trembled, but the tears had stopped, leaving her cheeks streaked with salty trails. The judge sat across from her, his expression a careful balance of concern and determination. The gravity of her story weighed heavily in the room, filling the silence as he waited for Detective Lila Harrington to arrive. A knock on the door broke the tension. The bailiff opened it to reveal Lila, a seasoned detective with a sharp eye and a reputation for getting results. Her dark hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, and her piercing gaze swept the room before landing on Sapphire. Softening, she approached the girl, crouching to her level. "Hi, Sapphire," Lila said gently, her voice calm and soothing. "I'm Detective Harrington. I'm here to help. Can you tell me more about what happened?" Sapphire hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in the blanket. She glanced at Judge Everhart, who gave her an encouraging nod. "It's okay," he said. "You can trust her." Taking a deep breath, Sapphire began to speak, her voice small but steady. "We've been living with bad people," she said. "They said they were helping us, but they weren't. They made us stay in this house, and it's not safe. My little brother, Tobias, is still there. I got away, but they lock him in the basement." Lila's expression darkened, but she kept her voice calm. "Sapphire, do you know where this house is? Can you describe it for me?" Sapphire nodded slowly. "It's big and old. The windows are broken, and the yard has a fence, but it's falling down. There's a big tree in front, with no leaves. The basement door is on the outside, and it has a metal lock." Lila scribbled notes quickly, her mind already running through potential matches. "Do you remember anything else? The street? The area? Anything nearby?" The girl's brow furrowed as she thought. "It's by the highway," she said after a moment. "I saw the cars when they let me outside once. And there's a sign. It's broken, but it says something like Maple." Lila looked up at Judge Everhart. "That's a start," she said. "I'll cross-reference abandoned properties near highways with names like Maple." Judge Everhart nodded. "Make it fast, Lila. This is urgent." Sapphire reached out suddenly, grabbing Lila's arm. Please, she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. They'll hurt him. You have to hurry. Lila placed her hand over Sapphire's, her voice firm. We're going to find him, Sapphire. I promise. As Lila left to begin the search, the judge turned back to Sapphire. You're very brave, he said, his voice steady. You did the right thing coming here. Sapphire's lip trembled. I was scared, she admitted. But I didn't know who else to go to. Mom always said you'd help us if something bad happened. The mention of Vanessa hit the judge like a punch to the gut. Memories of her laughter, her strength, and their time together flooded his mind. He had always wondered what became of her, and now the answer was sitting right in front of him, a daughter he never knew he had. Sapphire, he said carefully, can you tell me more about your mom? When was the last time you saw her? The girl's eyes filled with tears again. She tried to protect us, Sapphire said, her voice breaking. She told them to leave us alone, but they got mad. I don't know what happened after that. One day, she was just gone. The judge's throat tightened. He didn't press her further, knowing she had already been through enough. But the thought of Vanessa being hurt, or worse, gnawed at him. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Another knock interrupted his thoughts. The bailiff entered with a tray of food and a glass of water. Thought she might need something to eat, he said gruffly, setting the tray on the table. Sapphire looked at the food hesitantly before taking a small bite of the sandwich. Judge Everhart watched her, a mixture of admiration and sorrow in his chest. This brave little girl had carried so much on her tiny shoulders, and he was determined to lift that burden. Sapphire, he said softly, while we work on finding Tobias, I want you to stay here where it's safe. No one can hurt you here, I promise. She nodded, her trust in him growing. You won't stop looking, will you? She asked, her voice barely audible. Never, he said firmly. I'll do everything I can to bring him back to you. Hours later, the judge sat at his desk, poring over files and maps. Lila called with updates every hour, and though progress was slow, she assured him they were narrowing down the search. As the night wore on, Sapphire fell asleep on the couch in his chambers, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Judge Everhart glanced at her, his heart aching. He had spent years building a life defined by order and justice, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this. When his phone buzzed again, he snatched it up. Everhart, he said quickly. It's Lila, came the detective's voice. We've got a lead. A property matching Sapphire's description just came up in the system. It's about 30 miles from here, near Maple Drive. The judge straightened in his chair. Send a team now. And I'm coming with you. Malcolm, you're not a cop, Lila said, exasperated. You can't. I'm not asking for permission, he interrupted. I'll meet you there. Hanging up, he glanced at Sapphire, still sleeping peacefully. He felt a surge of protectiveness. This wasn't just about justice, it was personal. For her. For Tobias. And for Vanessa. Grabbing his coat, Judge Everhart steeled himself. He wasn't sure what they would find, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't stop until both children were safe. The tension in the car was palpable as Judge Everhart rode alongside Detective Lila Harrington and 2 SWAT officers. The team was en route to the property on Maple Drive, the first solid lead they had in their search for Tobias. The judge's jaw was set, his hands gripping his knees as he stared out the window at the passing trees and occasional streetlights. Though he wasn't a cop, his presence felt non-negotiable. He had a personal stake in this mission. Lila glanced at him from the driver's seat, her expression skeptical but resigned. You're sure about this? She asked. Once we get there, it's going to be chaotic. It's not a place for a judge. I'm not here as a judge, Everhart replied firmly, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. I'm here for those kids. For Tobias. For Sapphire. Lila didn't argue further. She understood his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for family. The car pulled onto a dirt road, the headlights illuminating a decrepit house in the distance. The property matched Sapphire's description perfectly, a large, weathered structure with boarded-up windows and a rusted chain-link fence surrounding it. A gnarled tree loomed over the front yard, its bare branches casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. The SWAT van pulled up behind them, and the team quickly assembled, their black uniforms blending into the night. "Perimeter check," the SWAT captain ordered in a low voice. "No lights. Move quietly." The officers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they scanned the area. Lila and Judge Everhart stayed behind, watching intently as the team worked. The house looked lifeless, but its ominous presence hinted at the horrors it concealed. After a few tense moments, one of the officers returned. "We've got movement," he reported. "Basement window. Looks like a kid." Everhart's heart clenched. "Tobias," he whispered. Lila motioned to the SWAT captain. "Let's breach," she said. "We go in clean and fast." The captain nodded, signaling his team to move into position. The officers surrounded the house, their weapons drawn. Everhart and Lila stayed a safe distance back, but the judge's instincts screamed for him to charge forward. He forced himself to remain calm, this was a job for professionals. With a nod from the captain, the breach began. The front door was kicked open with a deafening crash, and the team stormed inside. Shouts of "clear" echoed through the house as they swept each room. Everhart held his breath, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Basement secured," an officer reported. "We've got kids down here. Multiple hostages. Requesting medical support." Everhart surged forward, but Lila grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said firmly. "Let them do their job." He reluctantly stopped, his heart pounding as he watched the officers emerge from the house, leading a line of frightened children. The sight was both heartbreaking and infuriating, small, pale faces, wide with fear, and tiny hands clutching at one another for support. And then, he saw him. Tobias. The boy was clutching a tattered blanket, his dark eyes scanning the crowd anxiously. He looked younger than his years, his small frame dwarfed by the oversized sweatshirt he wore. The moment Tobias stepped outside, Everhart broke free from Lila's grip and rushed toward him. "Tobias," he called, his voice cracking with emotion. The boy froze, his eyes locking onto the man running toward him. For a moment, he seemed unsure, but then his face crumpled, and he cried out, "Sapphire said you'd come." Everhart dropped to his knees, wrapping the boy in a protective embrace. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No one will ever hurt you again." Tobias clung to him, his small body trembling. "Where's Sapphire?" he asked between sobs. "She's safe," Everhart assured him. "She's waiting for you. Let's get you out of here." As the paramedics arrived to examine the children, Lila and Everhart spoke with the SWAT captain. "How many did you find?" the judge asked, his voice steady but laced with fury. 6 kids, the captain replied grimly. "All in the basement, locked in makeshift cages. The conditions were horrific. We also detained 2 suspects, but there may be more connected to this operation." Lila nodded, her jaw tightening. "We'll interrogate them. This is bigger than just this house." Everhart's fists clenched. He had seen many horrors in his years as a judge, but nothing prepared him for the reality of children being treated as commodities. He glanced at Tobias, who was sitting on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket and clutching a cup of hot cocoa. The sight solidified his resolve. This wasn't over. Later that night, Everhart and Lila drove Tobias back to the courthouse, where Sapphire was waiting. The girl jumped up the moment the door opened, her face lighting up when she saw her brother. "Tobias," she cried, running to him. Sapphire. Tobias shouted back, throwing himself into her arms. The two siblings clung to each other, their tears flowing freely. Everhart watched them, his heart swelling with both relief and determination. He knew their journey wasn't over, there would be questions, investigations, and challenges ahead. But for now, they were safe, and that was all that mattered. Lila approached him, her voice low. "You did good tonight, Malcolm. But this is just the beginning. Whoever's behind this operation won't stop unless we shut them down." "We will," Everhart said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." As he looked at the two children, reunited and safe, he felt an unfamiliar but welcome warmth in his chest. For the first time in years, he understood what it meant to fight not just for justice but for family. And he wasn't about to let them down. The courtroom chambers were unusually quiet the next morning as Judge Everhart sat at his desk, reviewing the reports from the raid on the Maple Drive house. The files were filled with grim details, descriptions of the basement's conditions, statements from the children, and the initial interrogation of the suspects. It was a dark reality to process, but he couldn't let himself look away. These were the lives of innocent children, stolen and scarred, and it was his duty to ensure they got the justice they deserved. Sapphire and Tobias were asleep on a small couch in the corner of the room, bundled together under a thick blanket. Despite the horrors they had endured, they seemed peaceful in each other's presence. Everhart glanced at them, his chest tightening with a mix of protectiveness and sorrow. These children had been through hell, and while they were safe now, the journey to healing was only beginning. The quiet was broken by a knock on the door. Detective Lila Harrington stepped in, her expression grim but purposeful. She carried a thick folder and a steaming cup of coffee, which she set on the judge's desk before sitting down across from him. "Morning," she said, her voice low. "How are they holding up?" Everhart nodded toward the couch. "As well as can be expected. They've been through so much." Lila sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We've made some progress," she said, opening the folder. "The suspects we arrested aren't talking, but we've identified them as low-level enforcers in a larger trafficking network. This operation goes deeper than we thought." Everhart's jaw tightened. "How deep?" "Deep enough that it's going to take time to bring everyone involved to justice," Lila replied. "We've traced some financial transactions back to a shell company, which leads to a few names we're investigating. But it's a tangled web." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "And the kids? What happens to them now?" "We've contacted Child Protective Services, but given what they've been through, placing them in standard foster care isn't ideal," Lila said. "They'll need specialized support, therapy, stability, someone they can trust." Everhart's gaze shifted to Sapphire and Tobias, who stirred slightly but remained asleep. "I want them to stay with me," he said firmly. Lila blinked in surprise. "Malcolm, that's not exactly protocol." "I don't care about protocol," he said, his voice steely. "They need stability, and they trust me. Moving them from place to place will only traumatize them further." Lila studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll talk to CPS and see what we can arrange." "But you realize this is a big responsibility?" "I do," Everhart said. "And I'm prepared for it." Later that day, Sapphire and Tobias woke to the smell of pancakes and bacon. The bailiff, a gruff but kind man named Hank, had taken it upon himself to cook breakfast for the kids. Sapphire smiled timidly as Hank set a plate in front of her. "Eat up, kid," he said. "You need your strength." Tobias giggled as he tried to pick up a too large piece of bacon, and Sapphire gently helped him. It was a simple, domestic moment, but for Everhart, it felt monumental. These children, who had known nothing but fear and uncertainty, were finally beginning to feel safe. As they ate, Everhart sat with them, his tone gentle but serious. "Sapphire, Tobias," he began, "we're going to make sure you're both safe from now on. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Sapphire nodded immediately. I trust you, she said. Mom said you'd take care of us. The mention of Vanessa sent a pang through him, but he pushed it aside. And I will, he promised. No one is going to hurt you ever again. Tobias looked up at him with wide eyes. Do you think Mom is? Is she okay? He asked hesitantly. Everhart hesitated, not wanting to give them false hope. We're going to find out, he said carefully. I promise you that. That afternoon, Lila returned with an update. CPS has agreed to let the kids stay with you temporarily, she said. But you'll need to file for temporary guardianship to make it official. Everhart nodded. Consider it done. There's something else, Lila said, her tone shifting. We found a connection between the suspects and Vanessa. Everhart's heart skipped a beat. What kind of connection? Lila opened her folder, pulling out a photograph of Vanessa from years ago. Vanessa was on their radar. We think she may have been trying to expose the operation. That could explain why she disappeared. His grip on the desk tightened. Do you think she's still alive? Lila hesitated. I don't know. But if she was involved in uncovering the trafficking network, it's possible she's being held somewhere, or worse. Everhart's mind raced. If Vanessa had risked her life to protect these kids and bring down the network, then finding her wasn't just about justice, it was personal. I want every resource we have on this, he said, his voice resolute. We find her. That evening, Everhart sat with Sapphire and Tobias in his living room. The kids were curled up on the couch, watching an animated movie. He sat nearby, watching them but lost in his thoughts. The weight of everything, the network, the missing children, Vanessa, pressed heavily on him. Sapphire noticed his distant expression and reached out, placing a small hand on his arm. Are you okay? She asked softly. Everhart blinked, startled by her question. He smiled faintly. I'm fine, Sapphire. Just thinking. You're going to find her, aren't you? Sapphire asked, her voice filled with quiet confidence. You're going to find Mom. Yes, he said, his voice steady. I am. As the night wore on, the children fell asleep on the couch, their breathing soft and steady. Everhart covered them with a blanket, his determination solidifying. This wasn't just about a case or even justice, it was about family. And he wouldn't rest until they were whole again. Over the next several days, Judge Everhart worked tirelessly to untangle the web of lies, corruption, and danger surrounding Vanessa's disappearance and the trafficking network. He juggled his responsibilities at court with late-night strategy sessions in his study, poring over documents, maps, and reports from Detective Harrington and her team. Every clue brought them closer to understanding the full scope of the operation, but one question haunted him: where was Vanessa? Sapphire and Tobias adapted slowly to their new routine. Everhart made it a point to spend as much time with them as he could, ensuring they felt safe and cared for. Sapphire, always protective of her younger brother, took on the role of his guardian even as she leaned on Everhart for support. The judge admired her strength but worried about the toll it was taking on her. One evening, as the children played quietly in the living room, Detective Harrington arrived with new information. She carried a thick file and wore a look of cautious optimism. I've got something, she said, setting the file on Everhart's desk. It's about Vanessa. Everhart's heart raced as he opened the file. Inside were photographs, phone records, and a series of emails between Vanessa and an investigative journalist. The correspondence revealed that Vanessa had been gathering evidence against the trafficking network for months before her disappearance. She was working undercover, Lila explained. She pretended to be part of the network to gather information and build a case. But something must have gone wrong. She stopped contacting the journalist 2 weeks before she disappeared. Everhart studied the emails, his hands trembling slightly. Do we know who she was working with? Anyone who might know where she is now? There's a name, Lila said, pointing to a highlighted section in the emails. Maxwell Reed. He's a former associate of the traffickers, but he turned informant years ago. Vanessa mentions meeting him several times to exchange information. Where is he now? Everhart asked. Lila hesitated. He's in hiding. But I've got a lead on his location. It's risky, but if we can find him, he might know what happened to Vanessa. Everhart leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. I'll go with you, he said. Lila raised an eyebrow. You're not a cop, Malcolm. You can't just. I don't care, he interrupted. Vanessa risked everything to protect those kids. I'm not sitting back while someone who might know her whereabouts is out there. After a moment, Lila nodded. Fine, she said. But we do this by the book. The next day, Everhart and Lila set out to find Maxwell Reed. Their destination was a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where people went to disappear. The motel's neon sign buzzed faintly, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few battered cars. Room 12, Lila said, checking her notes. That's where he's staying. They approached the room cautiously. Lila knocked on the door, her hand resting on the holster at her side. Maxwell Reed? This is Detective Harrington. We need to talk. There was a long pause, followed by the sound of shuffling inside. The door opened a crack, revealing a wiry man with tired eyes and a scruffy beard. He looked at Lila, then at Everhart, his gaze wary. What do you want? He asked, his voice hoarse. We're here about Vanessa Jameson, Lila said. We know you worked with her. We need to know what happened. Maxwell's eyes widened slightly, and he stepped back, motioning for them to enter. Close the door behind you, he said. And keep your voices down. Inside, the room was dimly lit and cluttered with papers, empty coffee cups, and a laptop. Maxwell perched on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands together nervously. Vanessa was brave, he said. Too brave for her own good. She was getting close to exposing the whole operation. What happened to her? Everhart asked, his voice tight. Maxwell sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. She got too close. The higher-ups in the network started getting suspicious. She told me she was meeting with someone who had proof, something that could bring the entire organization down. That was the last time I heard from her. Who was she meeting? Lila pressed. I don't know, Maxwell admitted. But she mentioned a warehouse near the docks. Said it was where they kept their most sensitive documents. If you're looking for her, that's where I'd start. Everhart's fists clenched. Do you think she's still alive? Maxwell hesitated, then nodded slowly. If she's not, it's because she got too close. But if they think she's useful, they might still have her. Armed with this new information, Lila and Everhart returned to the courthouse to plan their next move. Everhart couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He looked at Sapphire and Tobias, who were sitting on the couch playing a board game, and felt a renewed sense of urgency. They deserved to have their mother back. That night, as the children slept, Everhart sat in his study, staring at the map of the dock spread across his desk. Lila's words echoed in his mind, this is just the beginning. He had come so far, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The dim light of dawn filtered through the windows of Judge Everhart's study as he finalized plans for the raid on the docks. The location Maxwell Reed had provided was a sprawling network of warehouses along the waterfront, the kind of place that thrived in shadows and secrecy. It was the perfect location for the kind of operation Vanessa had been investigating. Everhart stared at the map spread across his desk, his jaw tight with determination. Detective Lila Harrington entered the study, her expression as grim as his. The team is ready, she said. SWAT will move in with full force. But Malcolm, you need to know, this isn't just another raid. If Vanessa's there, the people holding her won't let her go easily. Everhart nodded. I understand the risks. But if there's even a chance she's alive, I need to be there. Lila hesitated, then relented. Fine. But you follow my lead, and you stay out of the line of fire. Understood? Understood, he replied. Before they left, Everhart checked in on Sapphire and Tobias, who were still asleep in the guest room. He stood in the doorway, watching them for a moment, his chest tightening. These children had endured so much, and he couldn't bear the thought of letting them down. With a deep breath, he turned and left, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The convoy of police vehicles and SWAT vans rolled silently toward the docks. The air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that settled in the pit of the stomach and refused to leave. Everhart sat beside Lila in the lead car, his mind racing with possibilities. He thought about Vanessa, where she might be, what she might have endured, and the thought filled him with equal parts fear and resolve. As they neared the location, Lila briefed the team over the radio. We have intel suggesting that this warehouse is a key hub for the trafficking network. Primary objective: secure the location, rescue any hostages, and apprehend suspects. Move quickly and carefully. No unnecessary risks. The vehicles came to a stop just outside the perimeter of the docks. The team fanned out, their movements precise and silent. Everhart followed behind Lila, keeping his head low and his steps quiet. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking structure with boarded-up windows and rusted doors. It was surrounded by stacks of shipping containers, creating a maze-like environment that felt both claustrophobic and exposed. The SWAT captain signaled for the breach, and the team moved into position. With a loud crash, the door was kicked open, and officers stormed inside. Shouts of "Clear!" echoed through the space as they swept the main floor. The building was vast and dimly lit, with rows of shelves lined with crates and boxes. But it wasn't empty. The sound of footsteps and muffled voices came from the far side of the warehouse. The team advanced cautiously, their weapons trained on the source of the noise. As they rounded the corner, they found a group of armed men gathered around a desk, their faces lit by the glow of a laptop. The suspects froze, their hands hovering near their weapons. "Drop your weapons!" Lila shouted. "Now!" For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, one of the men lunged for his gun, and chaos erupted. The SWAT team opened fire, their precise shots taking down the armed men before they could retaliate. The suspects were quickly subdued, their weapons kicked away as officers secured the area. Everhart stayed back, his heart pounding as the gunfire ceased. Lila approached him, her expression grim but focused. "This isn't over," she said. "The intel Maxwell gave us mentioned a lower level. If Vanessa's here, that's where she'll be." The team located a hidden door at the back of the warehouse, concealed behind a stack of crates. It led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Everhart followed Lila down, his breath shallow as they entered what could only be described as a dungeon. The air was damp and cold, the walls lined with makeshift cells. "Clear the rooms," Lila ordered, her voice steady. One by one, the officers checked each cell, calling out as they found survivors, frightened women and children who had been locked away, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Everhart's chest tightened as he saw their condition, but he forced himself to stay focused. Finally, they reached the last cell. Lila shone her flashlight inside, and Everhart stepped forward, his heart in his throat. "Vanessa," he called out, his voice trembling. For a moment, there was no response. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and her face gaunt, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination that hadn't dimmed despite her captivity. "Malcolm," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Everhart felt his knees go weak. "Vanessa," he said, stepping closer. "It's me. You're safe now." She took a hesitant step forward, as if unsure whether to believe what she was seeing. Then, with a sob, she threw herself into his arms. Everhart held her tightly, his throat thick with emotion. "I've got you," he whispered. "I'm not letting you go." The ride back to the courthouse was quiet, the weight of the night settling over everyone. Vanessa sat beside Everhart, her head resting on his shoulder. She was weak, but her spirit was unbroken. He couldn't stop looking at her, afraid that if he looked away, she might disappear. When they arrived, Sapphire and Tobias were waiting in the lobby, their eyes lighting up as they saw her. "Mom!" Sapphire cried, running to her. Vanessa dropped to her knees, pulling both children into her arms. They clung to her, their tears mingling with hers as they held each other tightly. Everhart watched from a distance, his chest aching with a mix of relief and gratitude. Lila approached him, her expression soft. "You did it," she said. "You brought her home." "No," he replied, his voice steady. "We did." As he looked at his reunited family, Everhart felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. The battle wasn't over, there were still people to bring to justice, still wounds to heal, but for the first time in years, he felt whole. The days following the rescue were a whirlwind of activity, emotions, and logistics. Vanessa, weak but recovering, stayed at Judge Everhart's home with Sapphire and Tobias. The children rarely left her side, clinging to her as if afraid she might vanish again. For her part, Vanessa seemed unable to stop holding them, her hands constantly stroking their hair or squeezing their small hands as if to reassure herself they were real. Judge Everhart watched from the periphery, his heart full yet heavy. The family's reunion was a beautiful moment, but the fight wasn't over. The trafficking network was still active, its shadowy leaders untouched, and the wounds inflicted on Vanessa and the children were far from healed. Detective Lila Harrington arrived one afternoon, her face set with determination. She carried a stack of files under her arm, her movements brisk as she joined Everhart in the study. Vanessa, sitting nearby on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, perked up at Lila's entrance. "What's the latest?" Everhart asked, his tone steady but urgent. Lila set the files on the desk and opened one. "The raid on the docks gave us a treasure trove of evidence," she said. "Financial records, shipping manifests, even encrypted communications. It's enough to dismantle a significant portion of the network." "And the leaders?" Everhart asked. Lila's expression darkened. "That's where it gets complicated. The people at the top are careful. They operate through layers of intermediaries, making it nearly impossible to track them directly. But Maxwell's intel, combined with what we recovered, points to a central figure, a man known only as Kingston. He's the one pulling the strings. Do we know where he is?" Vanessa asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Lila shook her head. "Not yet. But we're getting closer. Every piece of evidence we analyze brings us one step closer to shutting this operation down for good." Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "I want to help," she said. "I know their methods, their patterns. I spent months infiltrating their operation. Let me use what I know to bring them down." Everhart frowned, his protective instincts kicking in. "Vanessa, you've been through enough. Let the authorities handle this." She turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "Malcolm, this isn't just about me. It's about every family they've torn apart, every child they've hurt. I can't sit back and do nothing." Lila nodded, her respect for Vanessa evident. "She's right," she said. "Her insight could be invaluable. But we'll need to keep her involvement discreet. If Kingston finds out she's helping us, she could become a target again." Everhart sighed, torn between his desire to protect Vanessa and his recognition of her strength. "If you're going to do this," he said finally, "you'll do it with the full protection of the law. No risks." Vanessa nodded, her expression resolute. "Agreed." Over the next several days, Vanessa worked closely with Lila and her team, providing critical information about the network's operations. She identified key players, decoded messages, and pinpointed safe houses and drop points. The more she revealed, the clearer it became that Kingston was at the center of it all, orchestrating the network with ruthless efficiency. Meanwhile, Everhart focused on ensuring the children's well-being. He arranged for Sapphire and Tobias to meet with a trauma counselor and enrolled them in a nearby school. He also began the process of filing for official guardianship, determined to give them the stability they deserved. One evening, as the children played a board game in the living room, Vanessa and Everhart sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. The cool night air carried a sense of calm, a rare reprieve from the chaos of their lives. "You've done so much for us," Vanessa said softly, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Everhart replied. "You and the kids are my family. I'll always fight for you." She turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've missed you," she admitted. "There were so many nights when I thought about reaching out, but I was scared." "Scared of what?" he asked gently. "That you'd moved on," she said. "That there wouldn't be a place for me in your life anymore." Everhart reached for her hand, his voice firm. "Vanessa, you've always had a place in my life. And now, you have a place in my home, with me, with the kids. We're rebuilding, together." As the investigation continued, a breakthrough finally came. Lila burst into Everhart's office late one night, her excitement barely contained. "We've got him," she said, holding up a folder. "Kingston. We traced a series of offshore accounts to a private estate in the Caribbean. He's been hiding there, running the operation remotely." Everhart stood, his pulse quickening. "What's the plan?" Lila smiled grimly. "An international task force is mobilizing as we speak. This ends now." Vanessa, who had been listening quietly, stood as well. "I want to be there when they take him down," she said. Everhart hesitated, then nodded. "You've earned that right." The next day, as Vanessa prepared to accompany Lila, Everhart stayed behind with the children. He watched them play in the backyard, their laughter filling the air. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The storm was nearly over, and their family's future was finally within reach. As he looked up at the sky, he whispered a silent prayer, for Vanessa's safety, for justice, and for the strength to continue rebuilding the life they had all fought so hard to reclaim. The morning of the operation to capture Kingston dawned with a sense of both anticipation and finality. Vanessa stood with Detective Lila Harrington and the International Task Force, ready to take down the man who had orchestrated so much pain. The private estate in the Caribbean had been under surveillance for days, and now, the team was poised to act. Vanessa wore a bulletproof vest over her plain black shirt, her face set with determination. Though her hands trembled slightly, her resolve was unwavering. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about ensuring that no other family endured what hers had. Lila stood beside her, a reassuring presence, her voice steady as she gave the final briefing. "Kingston is dangerous, but he's cornered," Lila said. "Our intel shows he's holed up in the main building. We go in fast, secure him, and retrieve any evidence we can. Vanessa, you stay behind the line. Let the task force handle the entry." Vanessa nodded, though the tension in her jaw betrayed her frustration at being sidelined. She knew the risks, but she also knew the importance of seeing this through. "Just bring him out," she said quietly. "I need to see him face justice." The team moved swiftly, their vehicles rolling silently toward the sprawling estate. The property was surrounded by high walls and lush vegetation, a fortress hidden in paradise. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was the only noise as the task force approached the gate, cutting through the heavy padlock with precision. Inside, the estate was eerily quiet, the opulence of the surroundings contrasting sharply with the dark deeds that had been orchestrated within. The team swept through the grounds, their movements coordinated and efficient. As they neared the main building, a sharp whistle pierced the air, a signal. Gunfire erupted from the windows, the sharp crack of bullets breaking the stillness. The task force returned fire, taking cover behind stone pillars and decorative hedges. Vanessa watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding as she clutched the edge of the vehicle she was hiding behind. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the firefight continued. Finally, a shout rang out, "We've got him." Vanessa's breath hitched as two officers emerged from the building, dragging a man in handcuffs. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. Even in defeat, Kingston radiated an air of arrogance, as if he believed he was untouchable. The officers marched him toward the waiting vehicles, where Vanessa stood frozen. As they passed her, Kingston's gaze met hers. For a moment, neither spoke, but the weight of that look was palpable. Vanessa's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her body trembling with anger and relief. "You'll pay for what you've done," she said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "You'll never hurt anyone again." Kingston smirked, but the flicker of fear in his eyes betrayed him. He was no longer in control, and he knew it. Back in Manhattan, the news of Kingston's capture spread quickly. Media outlets reported the takedown as a significant victory against human trafficking, praising the bravery of the task force and the whistleblowers who had risked everything to bring the operation to light. Vanessa's role remained anonymous, but within the walls of Everhart's home, she was celebrated as a hero. Judge Everhart had watched the events unfold from his living room, glued to the television as reports streamed in. When Vanessa returned that evening, he met her at the door, pulling her into a tight embrace. Sapphire and Tobias rushed to join them, their small arms wrapping around their mother. "You did it," Everhart said softly. "You brought him down." "We did it," Vanessa corrected, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." In the weeks that followed, the family began to settle into a new rhythm. Sapphire and Tobias started school, their laughter gradually returning as they adjusted to a life free of fear. Vanessa worked closely with Lila and advocacy groups to ensure the survivors of the trafficking network received the support they needed. She became a voice for the voiceless, using her experience to push for systemic change. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Sapphire looked up at Everhart. "Does this mean we're safe now?" she asked, her voice tentative. Everhart knelt in front of her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Yes," he said firmly. "You're safe. And you'll always be safe, because we're a family now. Nothing will ever change that." Tobias leaned against Vanessa, his eyes sleepy but content. "Does this mean we can stay here forever?" he asked. Vanessa looked at Everhart, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Yes," she said, her voice thick. "Forever." Months later, Everhart stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a crowd of reporters. Behind him stood Vanessa, Lila, and a group of advocates who had fought tirelessly to dismantle the trafficking network. The trial of Kingston and his accomplices was underway, and the evidence gathered from the raid had ensured a strong case. "This is not just a victory for one family," Everhart said, his voice ringing out across the crowd. "This is a victory for every child, every parent, and every community that has suffered at the hands of criminals like Kingston. Today, we send a message: we will not tolerate this. Justice will prevail." The crowd erupted into applause, and Everhart stepped back, joining Vanessa and the children. As they walked away from the courthouse, hand in hand, he felt a deep sense of peace. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but they had made it through together. For the first time in years, the future felt bright. Together, they had turned their pain into purpose, their fear into strength, and their broken past into a foundation for hope. And as they walked into that future, they did so as a family, stronger, united, and unbreakable. The conclusion of this story is a powerful testament to resilience, justice, and the transformative strength of family. It brings together themes of redemption and healing, showing how even the most broken lives can be pieced back together when people fight for truth and love. Vanessa's courage to infiltrate and expose a dangerous network is a reminder of the incredible sacrifices individuals make to protect others, even at great personal cost. Her reunion with her children and Judge Everhart symbolizes the power of hope and the determination to reclaim what was once lost. What makes this ending particularly moving is its balance of realism and optimism. The battle against the trafficking network is not portrayed as a simple victory but as an ongoing struggle, one that will require persistence and dedication. This nuance makes the story feel grounded, while the emotional payoff of the family's reunion delivers a deeply satisfying resolution. Judge Everhart's transformation from a stoic authority figure to a devoted father highlights the human capacity for growth and connection. By stepping beyond his professional role, he redefines what justice means, not just as a concept in the courtroom, but as a personal commitment to the people he loves. Ultimately, this story leaves readers with a sense of hope. It shows that while the scars of trauma may never fully disappear, the bonds of family in the pursuit of justice can pave the way for a brighter, safer future. It's a poignant reminder that even in the face of darkness, light can prevail when people refuse to give up on each other.